LMND Q4 Preview. Here we go. The main thing I expect from Q4 is that Q4 losses better be less than Q3 losses. That's the number one thing. Going back to Q4 2021, they said indeed 2022 is expected to be our year of peak losses. Then in Q1 2022, they said specifically peak losses are months away. Then in Q2 2022, they said accordingly peak losses are expected this quarter, Q3 2022, and Ebitda is expected to improve thereafter through to profitability. In the Q3 letter, they didn't so directly say that it would be their quarter of peak losses, but if you go all the way down to their guidance, we see that adjusted Ebitda guidance for Q4 was starting to go downwards, 65 million to 62 million versus that quarter was 65.7 million. And can we trust this guidance? Well, in their Investor Day presentation, they did say for 10 consecutive quarters, we have met or beat our financial guidance. And you might be wondering, well, is that true? What guidance can we exactly are they talking about? And I looked back over the last 10 quarters, and that is true. You look at their minimum adjusted or the projected Ebitda, and then their maximum, and then at the actual where it came in, this was always either within the range or better than the range. So as you can also see, the actual and the projected Ebitdas are slowly getting worse and worse over time as they're continuing to grow, continuing to accelerate growth, but the losses continue to get worse and worse until you get to have a pivot sort of change here. Q3 of last year was minus 74 to minus 69, and we came in at minus 65.7. And this next quarter, Q4, they were even projecting minus 65 and minus 62. So I would highly expect we should be in this range or better. And Rookie Investor asked me a good question on Twitter. He said, would you sell if losses were greater than Q3? I've been thinking on this question for the last several weeks. And would I sell if Q4 losses were greater than Q3 losses? I would seriously consider selling my shares. I think that would be a major red flag. I mean, they've had 10 consecutive quarters where they've correctly guided the Ebitda losses and either been in that range or better than that range. And now for the last approximately a year, they've been guiding that Q3 losses would be the worst and we should start to see improvement. And they really seems like from management, they have an emphasis on controlling costs or they're pushing towards that. So if in spite of all that, costs were still out of control, expenses, loss ratios were still out of control, and they're not improving, and Q4 losses were actually worse than Q3, that would be very concerning for me. Obviously, in that context, would have to listen to what their commentary would say, but it would be very concerning for me. Because, see, Lemonade is in a position where they need to can drive their costs down significantly. They're still at a total expense ratio of approximately 81%, and this needs to come down much, much further. This sort of plots out if they were to become successful, they need to gradually or aggressively cut costs and shift costs away so that their total expenses as a percentage of the gross earned premium gradually declines down to a much, much smaller number than it currently is. Which is why I'm happy to see one of my questions that's also one of the top voted, at least by number of shares represented, is what specific ways, administration, technology expenses, headcount, etc., are you reducing costs and overhead? How do you plan to reduce costs further and become as efficient as possible? So I'm really hoping this quarter, we hear a lot about this specific question, even in the letter, or even if they answer this question on the call, really trying to show us how are they becoming more efficient, where are they cutting the fat and being ruthless to cut the fat in the organization. I think as a company, they're in that position where they really need to focus on how are we going to reduce costs and reach profitability, and essentially treat every dollar of capital that they have like it's sacred. Other questions I asked was, how confident are you that your loss ratio will improve, that customer churn will reduce, and that you can cut operating expenses significantly? I asked this question because I wrote a thread a little while back where I said there's basically three main concerns for Lemonade. Loss ratio is too high, customer churn is too high, and operating costs are, you guessed it, too high. If they don't improve, it'll go bankrupt, but if they do, the upside is enormous. Let's look into why all three should improve over time. And I wrote this thread here explaining why all three of those should improve. You can read that. It's pinned at the top of my Twitter at PaperBagInvest, or there's another video I did. My third say question is that Lemonade disrupted insurance with conversational AI. We now see conversational AI technologies like ChatGPT and Bard starting to transform other industries. Is there additional upside in Lemonade from leveraging them or by the awareness they are creating? And this question was submitted by Javier, so shout out to Javier. Thank you for that great question and wording. I hope this question is answered, just to bring out some conversation about how much more efficient or more advanced could Lemonade's chatbots and whole customer process become. I'm not saying that Lemonade makes sense for them to have sort of a ChatGPT exact scenario that's much more open-ended maybe than Lemonade would need, but how much further and detailed could Lemonade go in sort of the chatbot world? I think would be interesting discussion to hear from them. So if you think any of these questions are worthy of your vote, please go upvote them on the Say platform. Of course, along with Q4's report, I'll also be updating my model along with my retention curve model, which looks at the retention of each cohort over time and the area under that curve, or the sort of lifetime value of each cohort. I will be updating that information in the next couple days, and that is available to all my Patreon supporters. So if you want to support the channel, you can find me on Patreon. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, it's in the bag.